Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, the only show on Indian television where you, the MSME, get center stage. This is ET Now's special daily initiative to give MSMEs and entrepreneurs the opportunity to be front and center in every industry and area that matters to you. Tonight, we're talking about the Kotak Committee recommendations for boards of companies as well as directors. And I have two of the biggest voices in the space to break it down for our MSME viewers about why you should keep this in mind, about why corporate governance is so important. First up tonight, we have Anita Belani. She is the Chief People Officer at Gaja Capital. Also joining us in studio tonight is Shailesh Haribhakti. He's Director of Intuit Consulting. Anita, Shailesh, thank you both very much for coming down tonight to talk about really the changes that MSMEs, SMEs, entrepreneurs, whether they're listed or are contemplating listing or in the process of listing, are going to now see going forward. Let's first and foremost start by talking about some of the key recommendations of the Kotak Committee, and maybe I can start with you, Shailesh.
So the key recommendations can be divided into four parts. One, those recommendations which will affect independent directors. Two, recommendations which will affect the whole board's functioning, including its committees. Then there is a set of recommendations which affects promoters, those who have majority equity in a company. And finally, there are systemic changes which are being sought to be brought out to improve the process of regulation and to improve the outcomes from governance. The overall overarching statement that I would like to make is that this is extremely important for the MSME and those who are aspiring to list population. Because for them, this can really be the big ticket to shareholder value creation.
Sure. Okay, so let's pick up on each of those. And in fact, Anita, let me come to you just before we break it down in terms of these four, key recommendations for small businesses, how it's going to change their life. I want to talk about the issue of corporate governance.
Right.
Very often on Leaders of Tomorrow, we hear from banks, we hear from people who are funding small businesses to say that their books are not very transparent, which is perhaps why they're not getting funded. The issue of corporate governance, therefore, is now more critical than it has ever been, if I can say so myself.
Right.
How is this going to fix that?
So, you're absolutely right, because what typically happens is if you're not a listed company and you're a small company, you think that corporate governance is not your agenda. A lot of times, because you're running after business, you want revenue to build, you're dealing with small issues, these things can take a backseat. But it's very important, if your aspiration is to grow and to get listed, that you put the building blocks in place way before that. Because what really happens is that it's not about just, okay, I'm doing the risk or the compliance part of it. It's about really putting together those processes and systems which will help you make better decisions as a business. It will also help you attract the right kind of people, because they want to come and work with companies that have clean systems and, well-kept books, so to say. And also the other thing is that it will help you in your growth in the future, because you can attract money if you have better corporate governance. So people will be more keen to invest with you, and banks will give you more money because they know that you're doing things the right way. So it is about really starting much before you want to list, so that when you list, it is not such a big leap for you. To build those systems.
Okay. Shailesh, corporate governance, is it, and maybe Anita, you can also talk about this, corporate governance for small businesses, is it a cause of concern only in India, or do you see across the world as well, realizing the importance of corporate governance for a small business is not really high up on their priority list?
My view is that it is now becoming extremely relevant.
Okay.
Most people have begun to believe that they need to have excellent financial reporting, the point you were making earlier. The specific recommendations here are three very big ticket recommendations. One is that the auditor is supposed to give focused attention to the client, and therefore should not be doing multiplicity of services for either subsidiaries or associate companies. And the fees should be so fixed that the shareholders have a say at the AGM on what the fees will be. This is very critical. Then there is the need to form a digital or a IT committee, specific committee.
Yeah.
The entire world, including the SME world, is moving from the physical world to the e-world.
Being brought on largely
Yes.
by GST.
All
Exactly.
digitization.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not digitized today, you simply do not have a chance of being part of an ecosystem. And the most critical part of ecosystem anywhere in the world is the SME.
Sure.
This is universal,
Okay.
whether in Europe or the US or Japan or wherever.
Okay.
And therefore, this whole need, you cannot interface in a digital world, in an ecosystem context, platform context, if you don't have your governance right.
Okay, so it's being sped up by the fact that everyone's moving into a very technologically driven world.
Right.
Absolutely.
Also, you mentioned GST, but I would take it broader than that, because if you look at the way businesses are getting affected by technology, and we've spoken about this on Leaders of Tomorrow before, that everybody is, tackling the issue of technology in the way they operate, in the way they transact with their customers, in the way the business is being done today. So technology and cyber security and IT systems are very critical for SMEs, and they also now form part of this Kotak Committee report, that there has to be an IT committee that is actually focusing on this. So as an independent director on the board of a company, it's my responsibility to be literate in that area.
All right, we'll take a very short break on this panel discussion, but much more on the other side in terms of what the Kotak Committee recommendations for boards and directors of companies could mean for you, the MSME. Just stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and tonight we are talking about corporate governance, why you and MSME should look at corporate governance at your companies, whether you're listed or not, and also we're discussing the Kotak Committee recommendations for boards of companies as well as directors. You, of course, are an independent director on several boards, like you just mentioned. Do you think that given the increased scrutiny that we're going to see on independent directors, MSMEs perhaps could find it harder to attract an independent director to come onto their board?
You're absolutely right. It's true that by and large you will see that independent directors now with so much scrutiny will say, why do I need to take this risk? Why should I go to a board which is unproven? Why should I join a board of a company which is small? Because of the heat that you take on as an independent director. But again, it goes back to the point, which is the first point on corporate governance. I would go and join a board of a company where I see that I can get involved in the strategy of that company and there is growth, provided corporate governance structures are in place and the CEO and the team are doing the right thing by the business, right thing by all the stakeholders. So it will be challenging, but if you do things right, you will be able to attract the right kind of people.
Okay, do you agree? Is it going to be easy for a small business then to attract an independent director?
No, it's never easy for even the large companies to attract the right kind of directors. But another fact is also emerging in India. It has become aspirational for many people, particularly women, to be on boards as independent directors. So there is no overall demand-supply mismatch. So what has Uday's committee recommended in this context? One, there has to be one independent woman director, very critical. Usually now the case is well made for at least two women directors, independent women directors to be there. Additionally, there is a minimum remuneration they have prescribed for the top companies at 5 lakhs per independent director. So it's not a trivial sum of money. And when this percolates down to the larger population, the cost benefit of being an independent director will become visible. Third recommendation is that there will be protection by way of insurance for professional indemnity insurance for these directors. Now that is very important to make people feel that they will not be hauled up for something that they were not responsible for. Any act which is criminal, of course you will have to pay the price for it. But if it is something that you, after diligence, might have missed, then there is protection under the Companies Act, and even there is good sense which has been brought into the whole discourse, because people want to make it possible for individuals to actually give their service as independent directors.
Okay, you're talking about women directors, and while the recommendation has been made by this committee, previous recommendations on having women directors, independent directors on boards, you had a deadline that came and passed. Most companies were not able to meet that, not because they didn't want to, but a lot of companies said there just aren't enough women independent directors who fit the criteria. I want to talk to you on that, Anita. Would you agree with that criticism, and how do small businesses then meet this criteria?
You know, I would take that criticism with a pinch of salt.
Okay.
What typically happened, you know, okay, this deadline came and went, and a lot of companies appointed their family members, you know, as independent directors. But it's about really going and finding the right talent, and the talent exists, believe me. You know, but the mindset was, and I used to run a search business at some point in my life. You know, whenever there was a demand for independent director women, we used to usually get this globally, you know, from some global boards. And there was a list of 15, 20 women that we used to have. And it was a typical thing for us to go look at that list. But since then, there has been a, you know, concerted effort to build this talent pool. You know, there are lots of mentoring programs. There are a lot of women that have expressed interest to be on boards. Like Mr. Haribhakti said, it's aspirational. And very, you know, I'm thankful that that rule came about and we got the opportunity. And now I think the mindset is also shifted. I'm not seen as a woman director so to check a box. I'm seen more as a director because I bring that value.
Okay.
So it is going to be tough, you know, for MSMEs, even large companies, to find the right talent, because there is something called the construction of a board. You know, the board should not be a static body. It should evolve based on what your needs are as a business. So therefore, you know, creating that board, the composition of the board is very important. And so at any given point in time, big companies also struggle with that. So that's a given, but still the talent pool is now much larger than before.
Okay, I want to talk about the cost implication for small businesses. Most small businesses that speak with us, most MSMEs, SMEs tell us that they're still struggling for the basics. In fact, a lot of them tell us that, you know, given that we have a paucity of funds, should we put off doing things like, you know, bringing technology on board? Should we put off having a branding and marketing strategy or a proper HR strategy? Because it's a cost that's that the business is going to ultimately bear. In this scenario then, your advice for the viewers of our show about why it is perhaps necessary for them that you have such a formal structure in place if you're looking at listing, and how you factor in then the cost that's involved?
So my view is that they should focus on the benefit, not on the cost. Sums were run on what might be the incremental cost if this entire report's implications were implemented over the 6,000 population of listed companies. Now we are not even talking about the 100 NSE emerged companies. It's just 334 crores. It's nothing. The benefit of getting better, tighter governance, better structure in risk management, better succession planning, better ability to deal with the digital world, all of this have got benefits which would far outweigh the costs. So therefore the focus your MSME listeners should switch to is look at the benefit and how to extract that benefit, as opposed to simply looking at the cost.
Okay.
I agree totally, and this is about investment. It's not about, you know, cost. You're investing in the right thing. And the other piece is that as an MSME, you know, my advice to a lot of MSMEs is have an advisory board. So you get into that, you know, reporting to a board view on a regular basis, and then when you actually list and have a proper, you know, board that is prescribed, it will not be such a leap for you. So get an advisory board, get discipline in the way you operate so that you're reporting to this board and it's taken seriously.
Okay.
And some unlisted companies of a certain size also have proper independent directors on their boards. So this is the step to the listing that will happen.
Okay.
Very important to look at it from that perspective. And if you look at the advisory board, a lot of people will do this on a pro bono basis as well.
Okay.
So it's not really a big cost for you at that time, but when you actually list, then you can start seeing the benefits of that.
So
Sure.
maybe just to bring a little bit of structure for the benefit of your viewers, the minute your turnover is approaching 500 crores and you're becoming a M of the MSME, you should start behaving as if you are a listed company.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what then happens, as Anita pointed out, is that you get the practice. So you're already on the runway. You can take off as soon as your listing happens. Because otherwise you would struggle immensely to suddenly bring in all the governance mechanisms and systems and processes and all of that.
Okay, so while both NSE Emerge as well as BSE SME do have several listed companies, usually there are calls for relaxation of certain rules for small businesses. Do you think there's a case here for some sort of relaxation or hand-holding to be really given to small businesses when it comes to meeting these norms?
It's not about relaxation, because this is not, there's no shortcut to governance.
Okay.
There's no shortcut to succession. Those are very important tenets of doing a business. And everybody has aspiration to become larger.
Sure.
The share price increasing and so on and so forth. But you cannot do concessions here.
Okay, there's no shortcut.
No, there's no shortcut. No.
Well, there may be very few limited areas
Yeah.
where you might want to make a distinction. For example, the new prescription is that the minimum size of a board should be 6 instead of the erstwhile 3. Maybe you want to keep the limit at somewhere closer to 3 for the MSME population, which is just coming into the listing space.
Sure.
So that they don't feel overwhelmed
Okay.
by the need to have, now how will I get 3 independent directors? Whereas otherwise they would have had to get 1 or 2.
Yeah, true. Yes.
So,
Okay. So as we are then ending this conversation, and let me come to you first on this, Anita. If you can tell our viewers 2 or 3 things that they definitely must keep in mind if they are to follow then the recommendations which have been put down by this committee, what should they do to ensure that they're compliant?
So one very critical thing is focus on corporate governance. This is not something that is good to have. This is a must-have. You should,
Whether you're listed or not.
Whether you're listed or not, because you need to get all your building blocks in place if you have aspirations to list well in advance.
Sure.
Because this should become part of the DNA of the organization.
Sure.
So corporate governance, focus on that. The other big focus is on technology. Keeping in mind how technology is going to play a big role in the way you operate, and it's not just GST but even otherwise. Technology is very critical, and cyber security is very critical. So that's the number 2 thing. The number 3 is start building your board. Get advisory board in place, like I said, first, and then get, if you reach about 400-500 crores in size, really have a board like you were a listed company board, so that when you finally list, it is not a leap for you at all. You have already got the structures in place for that.
Sure. Shailesh, my question to you, of the 36 million MSMEs in India at this point, a report suggests that a majority of them, almost 80% of them, are family owned. How easy, difficult is it going to be for a family-owned business then to move into having this formal corporate structure?
not at all difficult. I think if there's any piece of the population which realizes the value creating abilities of corporate governance, it is family managed businesses.
Yes.
I sit on several boards, including family managed boards, and I find that their adherence to it is far superior because they are extracting value. So therefore, my real takeaway for all your listeners would be, treat this as a benefit, not as a cost.
Sure.
And start planning for it. In your digitization strategy, bring in automation to governance and compliance.
Sure.
So compliance and governance should also be part of your digitization strategy, so that you don't think about it as an incremental cost. It is part of the DNA
Sure.
of your growth.
Anita, Shailesh, thank you both very much for coming down tonight and talking to us. That's a wrap then as far as this panel discussion on the Kotak Committee recommendations for boards as well as directors of companies, and also why corporate governance for an MSME, whether you're listed or not, is so crucial and so critical. If you have any feedback on the show, if you have any questions on your own corporate governance, we can get our experts to answer them for you. Write to us at leadersoftomorrow@timesgroup.com. Tweet at me at Sunanda_J or LOT_ET now on Facebook. Reach us at Leaders of Tomorrow on ET now. You can also call us on that number you see on your screen. We'd love hearing from you. Thanks very much for watching. Have a good night.